Hello, everyone. My name is Devidas. I'm the CEO of the Future Moves Group. Welcome to part 6 of a 7-part series on Singapore and economic crisis. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about what now. Now, if we look back in time and compare the size of the resident labor force, and by resident, I mean Singapore citizens and Singapore permanent residents, so not including the non-resident workforce, which are the employment pass holders, S-pass holders, and work pass holders. There's been significant growth between June 2009 and June 2019, from just under 2 million to almost 2.5 million. And a significant contribution to this growth has been made by the participation of women in the workforce. And this has been the result of policy intervention by the government to incentivize the growth of the childcare industry and the provision of very generous subsidies to make access to these services more affordable for households, in order to create conditions which are more conducive for women to make decisions to return to the workforce, either on a part-time or full-time basis, with the assurance that their children will be cared for. And it's important to recognize that as a result, we have essentially almost maxed out our labor force participation rate as a population, which is at about 68%. Because in addition to boosting the contribution of women to the workforce, the government also introduced something called the Special Employment Credit and its other incentives to try to increase the retention and the re-employment of seniors. And those numbers have gone up as well. So we've hit the limit of the headroom of employment of Singapore residents. Now, in the fourth of the 4 budgets that the government has released to date, there may be the 5th or 6th, we don't know. Certainly no one expected to see 4 budgets in 12 weeks. It promised to create 100,000 jobs in traineeships and training opportunities. Now, if we treat traineeships and training opportunities as sort of quasi jobs for the purposes of this discussion, because these do come with wage support, that helps us to understand what I'm going to show you next. First, that the Ministry of Manpower has a provisional estimation that resident unemployment was at 3.3% in March 2020. I expect this number to be revised when the next labor force report is released in June and revised upwards. I also expect the second quarter result to be worse than 3.3%, and in totality to reflect a deterioration that is happening in terms of the economic activity and the ability of businesses to hold on. However, this isn't the scary part. The scary part is what comes in the second half of 2020 and the first half of 2021, when JSS, the job support scheme, starts to wash off, or at least lower in terms of intensity of support, and its impact on businesses to be able to retain their employees. Now we take these 100,000 jobs, and as I mentioned, if we treat internships and traineeships, because there is going to be wage support, as quasi jobs, they represent 4.29% of the total labor force as a stock at the end at the end of June 2019. What this means is that the government's expectation, if we take the provisional assessment of 3.3% at March 2020 and look at what they're trying to do in terms of job creation or quasi-job creation over the next 12 months, that they expect that resident unemployment will hit at the end of this year and the early part of next year about 7.6%. Now, this is a very simple and crude way of looking behind the curtain to try to understand what's going on in the minds of the labor force economists at the Ministry of Manpower, as well as the economic planners at the Ministry of Trade and Industry. One of the things I want to point out is while we focus on unemployment, we really also have to think about underemployment. And that matters because underemployment, when taken together with unemployment, really represent the total impact of the economic contraction in employment terms across the workforce. Other measures that the government's going to introduce increase placements in institutes of higher learning. So it's going to be easier for people to attend ITEs, polytechnics, and universities, and to stay in those institutions to take higher level courses. And this is intended to try to keep our young population in the public education system and out of the workforce so that we don't have to count them as unemployed. It is a statistical game, but it may have a positive side effect in that when the recovery happens, they'll be better qualified to be able to participate in the workforce. But it can also have a negative side effect in that their qualifications may not have relevancy to what the workforce actually requires, and it need not necessarily translate to higher salaries because they won't have actual work experience. And in contrast to how we managed economic crisis in the 1980s and early 1990s, as I covered in earlier videos, especially the one called Past, Present, and Future, the government seems to expect government-linked companies to actively participate in trying to prop up employment numbers and therefore manage down unemployment numbers. And a perfect example of that is the Development Bank of Singapore announcing that it will be hiring 2,000 new workers this year, despite the fact that financial services are not going to be insulated from the effects of the economic contraction. In fact, financial services are the most vulnerable to of the services sector to aggregate economic contraction. So this does represent a significant change in policy approach. It's beneficial, of course, for workers, but whether that really makes sense from a business point of view is a question that I leave open to those of you who are shareholders in these companies, as well as those of you who are running your own businesses, if they're government linked, and asking yourself whether this, the carrying cost of this is actually something that is tolerable if you're not a listed company. But if you are a listed company, I think shareholders need to ask some hard questions as to what is the thinking and motivation behind increasing the size of the workforce at a time when there's significant economic contraction, there's significant impacts on financial services. This brings me to the end of part 6 of the 7-part series. Tomorrow will be the final part where I'll be dealing with projections and some anticipated problems over the midterm, which is the next 3 to 5 years. I hope part 1 to 6 has proved to be useful, informative, and hold some benefit to both you as a citizen, as well as a worker and as a business owner. Part 7 is going to contain certain projections that my company has developed, but I think that we can deal with that tomorrow. And what's important is, for now, to wish you all the best. Stay well, stay healthy. Look forward to part 7 on the same channel and same time tomorrow. And I look forward to engaging with you then.